Hey guys, welcome back to Sweet Red Poppy. On today's episode, we are going to be sewing a few different surgical masks. With surgical masks at an all-time low, hospitals are asking those of us who sew if we can make fabric masks. We can make such a huge difference in this type of need with a really simple project. In times of emergency, the CDC allows fabric face masks to be used when a shortage takes place and all other options have been exhausted. I want to be really clear that a homemade fabric mask does not guarantee someone protection from becoming infected with COVID-19. They are approved by the CDC to be used as a very last resort when all other PPE options have run out. Healthcare providers with handmade masks can use them on lower risk patients, such as cases of the flu, colds, etc., allowing the N95 masks to be reserved for emergency cases and high-risk patients who have tested positive for COVID-19. In some situations, nurses and even doctors are layering a fabric mask over their N95 to give the mask a little bit more longevity. So let's go ahead and get started. Something that's important to note, when we're sewing this, you should be using a tightly woven 100% cotton. If you're not sure what a tightly woven cotton looks like, go ahead and hold your fabric up to the light. You shouldn't be able to see through it. Please make sure that you're pre-washing your fabric with a mild detergent and no fabric softener. This will help to shrink the fabric before you sew it and prevent it from shrinking later on after it's been sewn. All masks should be washed and sanitized by the hospital before being put into use. For this tutorial, you'll need a cutting mat and a rotary blade, 3 pieces of 9x7" fabric, a package of 1/2 inch wide bias tape, wire cutters and wire, a ruler, sewing pins, an iron, and a sewing machine. For our very first project, we're working on making the surgical mask that features an opening along the back, which you can place a filter inside of. So to get started, we need 3 pieces of 9x7" fabric that have been cut. You'll want to have 1 piece for the front side and 2 pieces for the back side. To begin, place 2 pieces of fabric right sides together and save the 3rd piece of fabric for step 2. Place a pin in each corner of the rectangle and horizontally mark the center of your rectangle. I'm going to mark this by ironing it, just really lightly, just so I can see where to sew. Halfway down from the very top of the fabric, we're going to be sewing a horizontal line that's about 2 to 3 inches long. We're only going to sew on the left and the right hand side, leaving a gap along the middle. And this is going to create our filter pocket. Start at the edge and don't forget to backstitch. Raise your presser foot and go to the opposite end and sew again about 2 to 3 inches. Move your pins from the fabric. Pinch both of the top corners and pull them down to the bottom. And do the same on the back side as well. Now you're going to open this up and you have a little filter pocket right in the middle. You can easily slide something in there at the very end of this tutorial. I'm going to give this a good press just to make sure that it's completely flat. Place your 3rd piece of fabric on top with right sides facing each other and pin around the outside edges. Now we're going to sew the short sides of the rectangle, so the left and the right hand side, and we're going to make sure to use a back stitch at the beginning and the end and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now it's time to turn the mask right side out. I'm just going to turn this so that the pretty sides of the fabric are facing outwards. And I'm going to give this a good pressing. So roll the fabric between your fingers back and forth to make sure that it's rolled out completely, and give it a good press with a lot of steam. Now we're going to be creating a guide for our pin tucks. And there's a really easy way to do this without having to mark it. What I want to do is fold it in half, iron on either side, and then I'm going to fold my ends into the middle and iron again. Now that we've created our pin tuck markings, it's time to add our bias tape. And I've cut 2 different pieces of that. What we want to do is fold this in half, and we're going to be finding the center of it. And then you want to open up your double fold bias tape. Now, something that you should know about bias tape is that one side is slightly longer than the other. We want to put the slightly longer side on the back side. It makes it a little bit easier to catch the bias tape as you're sewing. So look for which side is longer. We're going to be securing the shorter side to our raw edge with a few pins. Now we want to sew the bias tape in place along the crease that's closest to the raw edges. Make sure to repeat this process on both sides of your mask. Our next step is optional depending on whether or not you want to have a flexible nose piece on your mask. If you do, go ahead and get your floral wire out. You want to cut about 7 inches of your floral wire. And to prevent your ends from sticking out or ripping your fabric, you're just going to curl them in. So curl either side inwards. I curl about 1/2 inch. Slide the wire into the bias tape along the top middle of your seam allowance. I'm just going to fold over this. I'm going to put a pin on either side of my floral wire just to keep it in place so that it doesn't shift around while I'm sewing. Fold the bias tape upwards and encase the raw edge inside of your bias tape. Go ahead and pin it in place on both sides. First, we're going to close the ends of all of our bias tape. Fold it in half, place a pin inside, and then sew along the short edge. Trim away your threads, and you can trim away the excess fabric as well. And then you're just going to push it right side out. Now repeat that process on the remaining 3 pieces of bias tape. When you start to sew your bias tape, make sure that you grab both your bobbin thread and your upper thread with your left hand and pull them out. Slide your bias tape underneath your presser foot. And then I like to pull on these as I'm beginning to sew. That way my fabric doesn't get caught into my sewing machine. Sometimes I have a hungry sewing machine and it will just eat that right up. I'm just sewing right along the edge of my bias tape as I'm going. I like to use my 2 fingers on either side of the bias tape just to create a channel for my bias tape to go through. That way I can kind of control where it's going. As you're sewing this, you can just check on the back side to make sure everything's lining up. Before I forget, I'm going to run a quick little stitch on either side of my wire just to make sure that it's not shifting around. Now I'm switching to the opposite side of my bias tape. I'm just going to repeat the exact same process. Again, don't forget to grab your threads and pull them away from you as you start sewing. Now take a minute just to trim all of your threads away. Position your face mask in front of you. Make sure that the wire is at the top. And now we're going to be creating our pleats. Start at the top and pinch. You're going to create about a 1/2 inch pleat on either side. Make sure that you're pinning all the way through. And your fold should be facing downwards. Now we're going to top stitch. You want to sew over the pin tacks along the right and the left-hand side. Our final step now that everything has been sewn is just to give your mask a good pressing with plenty of steam and to go ahead and cut away any stray threads that you might have. Now we have a finished mask with a flexible nose piece. It also has a spot on the back for inserting a filter. Thanks so much for joining in and sewing masks with us today. Make sure to contact your local hospital and see what they are in need of. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to Sweet Red Poppy, and I will be back next week with another tutorial.